I will on it. Okay. Share screen. Great. Okay. My computer claims that you can see my slide. Is it true?
Correct.
Great. Yeah, so welcome everyone. Thanks for being here today and being flexible with our meeting schedules. Hillary and Aaron and I have been working a lot and talking a lot about hub deliverables together and the transition from the regional system assessment into strategic planning, and wanted to grab some time with you to check in. I know that you all have really busy schedules like we do. And so I appreciate your time, and also will give you a heads up that we are really wanting to get your input as we're planning deliverable templates and such, especially looking at what's going to be on the grant agreement for the next biennium. And so we will be sending some invites to ask you to join us to plan things, and then to check on things as we're creating them to make sure that what we're creating is hitting the mark. So with the strategic planning template, we have a draft that we can look at today. It is not due until November, and we have some hubs who are already ready to be using it, have moved into that phase. So we have a little bit of a time push, but of course also want to make sure that we're taking the time to talk about it and make sure that it's something that's, one, going to work for everyone, and two, we're curious to know if we can combine the strategic plan with the work plan, and make that more seamless and connected. So we will talk about that when we get to that part. All right, so here's our agenda. We just did one. We're going to review the draft strategic planning document. Then we'll have a discussion about what we like about it or what questions we have about it, things that might not work. Then we'll do some brainstorming around what TA and coaching needs to accompany the strategic plan work. So asking you from ELD, what do you need from us to make sure that you have the support you need? And then a timeline, just a reminder of that strategic planning work. So I am gonna, oops, sorry, one more slide. So these are the deliverables that are in the current grant, and these two that we're talking about today are the ones in white. Primarily the strategic plan, but again, really wondering if it's possible to crunch the work plan into that, so that there's less dates around deliverables and maybe a more natural flow from strategic plan into work plan based on what your experience is of doing that. Okay, so I'm going to put this question up, and then I'm going to take the slide down so we can see each other. So we just wanted to start it off by asking you, like, what has worked in your strategic planning as hub directors, and with your staff and with your governance in the past? Aha, we tricked you. You thought you would just eat lunch, but no, we have questions.
Oh, I have a camera. Thank you. Sorry, I still have my camera turned around from the dog. So the strategic planning, I would not make the assumption that any of us are starting brand new, right? Like, we've been around for a while, so we all are working on a current strategic plan. So I think for me and for my hub and even partners that have their own strategic plans, it's making sure there's enough time to like assess what is already in our current plan, what we know is going to be changing or shifting because of what we may have learned differently through the regional system assessment process, and then being able to have again enough time built in to go back and engage the same audiences or similar audiences that we engaged in the RSA to like reflect to them, we have done all of, like, we've been through this process. This is what this is how our strategic plan is being updated based on our regional system assessment. Is that right? Like, being able to like continue to have that communication path with all of those audiences. And having the time built in to be able to do that well. So that's what I would just say is like, I'm not working from the assumption that I'm starting like from scratch with a strategic plan, but really updating what existed based on what we're learning through the RSA.
That totally makes sense, Dorothy. And I should have said that. When I say like what's worked in the past, I mean, yes, everyone already has strategic plans and probably multiples when you're working with different partners that you're part of their strategic plan. And it would be also really silly to just cross off your strategic plan from last year and be like, now we're done. We've finished everything. Everything's perfect. So yes, I'm taking notes. So making sure that we pull past strategic plans over and have time to do that, the above, including conversation and back and forth with partners who are involved in that planning. Okay, Renee.
Yeah, similar for us when Raise Up Oregon came out, originally we convened our stakeholder groups and we actually went through all of the goals and objectives and identified how our region was addressing those goals and objectives, or what else we could or should be doing to help address those goals and objectives. And then we built our plan from that. So I would assume that we would want to continue a similar strategy.
Jen, how about you? So we've been working on ours for about 8 months. It's kind of a 1-year process. As we came to the end of our 4-year plan that we already had in place, we started doing discussions at our council. And then I sent out a survey to the voting members, like, what do you want to keep? What do you want to carry over? And then over the summer, I did a bunch of individual interviews with council members. And then in the fall, we started breaking out the pieces we weren't clear on in small groups, took a report to the CCO board. And now the point we're at, we're aligning with other plans within the organization. So the CHIP, the Community Prevention and Wellness Fund plan, the CCO strategic plan, we're doing all that alignment and then working on equity lens and trauma-informed lens for our strategies. So, and the goal is to have ours wrapped up by our June meeting, which is second week of June. Jillian, why don't you say a comment, and then I think I want to take this conversation and make it even more of a fine point and talk about some of the templates that you've used in the midst of those processes and kind of what you like, what's working about those and what's not working. But before we get there, Jillian, why don't you share your comment and then I'm going to transition us.
Sure. For us, the last strategic plan was kind of interesting because we had Denise and Dylan telling us, you know, what we needed to add, what we could measure, and it was very prescriptive. And so I've loved the regional assessment process, and I've loved the way, Erin, that you've guided us. And from our conversations, it looks like possibly paring down and choosing goals that are doable versus everything in the kitchen sink. And so, you know, we just finished up our regional assessment, and it just took us about an hour and a half work with Erin to do that. And so I'd love to have more. I don't know if it's possible to have more work with Erin, because it's been really helpful for us to focus and to use the work we've done and move forward. And it was really hard when we did our strategic plan, and then there was more prescriptive work that was expected of us, and then more prescriptive outcomes. And that was kind of frustrating because it took a lot of extra work.
Okay. The big takeaways is having some flexibility and having some support as you're doing this throughout. Okay, I'm going to bring this even finer because I've been charged with creating the template. So I actually really have some very specific questions kind of in this conversation as I'm thinking about it, which is reflecting on some of the templates that you've used, your deliverables in the past. Let's start with an appreciative inquiry stance. What has worked, or what did you like about those prior strategic planning and work plan templates that we should make sure to keep for this new iteration that we should bring forward? What are people's thoughts?
Can I just throw in there real quick, just a few things from the chat? Just about using the Raise Up Oregon as the North Star and how can we focus strategic plans around those goals when is that going to be completed? Just going to throw that in the mix.
Yep. Yep. I'm gonna add that to my initial notes.
Great.
And we'll bring that in. So that was a nice, that was a nice pause for people to think if they like anything from the prior strategic plan or work plan template. And like Molly said, it is kind of confusing. And as I read, like many of the strategic plans and work plans from prior years, that kind of came through, is that there is not always consistent use of terms, and it was a little bit maybe confusing. But was there anything about the prior templates that you really liked that we should pull forward?
I'm not sure if I just did this or if I was supposed to do this, but we merged all of our strategic plan work plans into one. Because for a while there were different ones for different grants, and that was really frustrating. Because like I just need one place to look. And so I can't remember if we were allowed to do this or if we just did it, but putting them all into one plan.
We're in luck, Erin. That's sort of what we're trying to do. So, okay, excellent. We'll definitely do that. And Renee mentioned having a status column. You'll see that's also in the draft, so I'm glad that you mentioned that. How about, since this was like maybe a little bit harder for people to think, this next question might be a little easier. Was there anything you didn't like or didn't work so much about the prior format that would be good to bring up, just again, as we're co-designing what this template should look like?
So I'll just speak again.
Go.
Since we're all basing it off of previous ones, when the template changes drastically or a lot, like this last one changed a bunch, and it was trying to then make my plan fit into that plan, and it was different from the previous plans. So when it changes a lot, it's really time consuming to try and make our work fit into it.
That's a great point. Other things about the prior templates that didn't work as well that we should take into consideration as we think about revisions? Yeah, Charlotte.
I'm just thinking back to the actual format, the tools that we use have changed over time. I think it was one year we did KPI using Smartsheets or something where we had to enter information in, and then it went away, which is really a difficult format if you have to update things and you want to have drafts, and there's definitely going to be different drafts. So just like having a format where we can go in and make changes and is really helpful. I also would love to see some ability for us to write in like short-term and long-term goals. So with a long-term goal that may be years away for us reaching, and then some shorter term things that we can build into those goals.
Awesome.
I think that for us, when we did the SP, it was a 1-pager. And then when we did the work plan, it's 46 pages that describes how we're going to be doing the work. But the SP is only the overarching goals or big goals that we are going to be tackling.
Yeah, there were definitely different lengths. I noticed that too as I was reading through them. Okay. Anything else? Any other reflections that we should bring up to inform how we think about revising this, simplifying and combining this? Yeah, Margie, go. You guys can just talk.
So for some of our programs, we use a very area by area planning process. And so, it can look quite different across the 10 different zones that we might be using to implement. So, having work plans or strategic plans that allow for that local variation would be really helpful rather than, in a area as populous as ours, but as diverse in terms of geography and, rural and urban and, high diversity and less diversity situations. We really need to have that flexibility to allow that local tailoring that's going to fit those community needs. So, having one template that we would be asked to include everything in just that one thing, I think would be just really confusing to the readers, reviewers of, what on earth is Marion and Polk doing?
That's a great point. And I know a lot of you will be in that same boat. I think let's all hold on to that as we look at the template I'm going to show you, the draft, and think creatively about how it could be adjusted to provide that flexibility. That's a great point. And Molly, I saw your comment. I tried to put a thumbs up, but it didn't work. Just trying to figure out how to incorporate quarterly reporting into that, so it's just more useful. Hillary and I were brain jamming around that too, so you'll see some of our ideas come in here. Yeah, Shira, there's going to be some gaps over time. I think that's okay. We can look again in terms of Aaron's comment about trying to figure out how to retrofit all the plans in the past to whatever format we end up with. Aaron, why don't you hold that? You can kind of be the keeper of that tension and think about how that relates to this plan, the draft. Anything else? Any other thoughts? Okay. I had two other observations that I made as I was reading through all of these. Let me get my screen so I can get it down. Sorry, like 15 clicks here. Here we go. Almost there, almost there. So I think I read through like every single strategic plan and work plan for all the hubs. And I reread Raise Up Oregon and was just like trying to think through the implications of all of that, including your RSA results. And here's a couple other high level observations I had that I want us to consider as we design this thing. Is that in the prior plans, there's really been like a limited focus on linking the strategies to the root causes. It's been kind of just like plug and play from Raise Up Oregon, and not always considering kind of the unique range of issues that are getting in the way of those objectives in your different areas. And from what we know from the systems change literature and the research on that, it's really important to like directly target strategies on local conditions and root causes and getting really deep into that. And so I didn't see as much of that, which is an area that I think if we change anything, bringing in a greater focus on root causes will elevate all of your work. I also saw some missed opportunities to really design your strategies around what I'm going to call pathways of root causes. And I think it's both in the strategic planning templates and in many ways in the Raise Up Oregon structure, that a lot of the issues, the objectives and root causes are like separated out artificially and sort of siloed. And so when you design strategies, sometimes you can be focusing on one issue, but not taking into consideration how it needs to be informed by other issues. So for example, there's a strategy in Raise Up Oregon and in perhaps some of the strategic plans around getting businesses to invest in ECE as like a community infrastructure. I know many hubs have been trying to figure out how to get businesses more in. So if that's your strategy, if that was all you're looking at, they could be investing in a lot of different things. But in many RSA processes I've been looking at, the results, one of the main root causes is inadequate wages. That's like sort of this cornerstone in some of the problems. And so if that strategy was instead directly focused and linked to some of the root causes around wages, those business investment opportunities, strategies could be directly focused on wages versus just the range of different things that it could be investing. And if that wages root cause was also informed by information on where slots are needed, what types of slots, when they need to be, the wages could again be in, like the strategy could be informed to highlight where to focus those investments so that those increases in wages would specifically lead to changes in that final cause. This is kind of heady, but it's really important when we're thinking about designing powerful strategies, is to like bring together some of the different objective areas and some of the different root causes so that the strategies you design are super targeted and at the end of the day are actually going to lead to some of the changes that are needed. So all that to say, I think there's a lot of opportunities to really like take these plans, these templates, and shift them in ways that will allow for some of these opportunities. And I'd love to show you an example of the draft we've been working on and have a very open conversation about what you think. I'm going to pause before we go into the draft and just kind of get people's sense of if there's any other observations or reflections you've had that again would be helpful as we think about co-designing this. And did those observations resonate with others? Should have said first. Charlotte, go ahead.
Yes, I think these observations do resonate with me. It does get me thinking about the hub's strategic plan being focused on Raise Up Oregon strategies, when really Raise Up Oregon is more than just the responsibility of early learning hubs to accomplish. So it also feels like as we're looking at streamlining our deliverables and our reporting and the work plan and strategic plan for the hub, that we should also be aligning our processes with other key partners that are also working on Raise Up Oregon strategies as well. So we have like a statewide strategic plan and local focus on how we're going to accomplish those goals, and everyone knows who's responsible for what, not just the hub staff.
Yep, absolutely. And so let's think about how to do that. I think another similar reflection I've had is many of you, I've talked to many of you about how to bucket some of the issues coming up in your RSAs into like local issues where you have direct control, and then state level issues where to change that, it's really going to take like all the hubs with the ELD and potentially other partners to try to advocate for change. And so also reflecting how that work is showing up is something else that I've been trying to think about including. And I don't necessarily have answers to all of these things, but this is what I want us to think about as we're looking at the template. Okay, well, why don't we just look at the template? Use that as a transition. So again, remember, this is not in stone. It is rather just kind of a first take at trying to address some of these opportunities and some of the issues that you brought up a moment ago. Let me show you this just so that you can kind of get a sense of what it is going to include. So there's basically, oh my goodness, Zoom is like just very difficult for me today. There's 4 main chunks to this template. So just so you can bucket them before I show you the specifics. So you've got a space for an objective, and you can have multiple objectives in this plan. They can be from Raise Up Oregon, and they can be from other objectives you're doing. So it starts, each kind of chunk section starts with an objective. Then it links the root causes that you've prioritized from your RSA that are contributing, affecting that objective. So think like objective 2 and all the stuff you found for the RSA. Then it has multiple strategies to address those root causes. And then we're thinking about how then can we layer on the work plan. So it's directly linked to those strategies. And like you had mentioned, someone had mentioned adding a status update and a way that you can actually incorporate a quarterly report into this. The CCR&Rs have done something similar with their plans. So we're looking at how to bring that in. So it's all kind of wrapped up into one central place. And again, this could be flexible enough so that it could include all the different facets of your work, multiple objectives, multiple sections. And like Charlotte, you mentioned, the strategies could be both those directly initiated by the hubs, but it could also reference other strategies being taken that the hub is partnering around or something like that. So let me show you this and bring you through it. So it's one page, okay? And again, this is like a section that could be replicated for however many objectives you would be including. And you could have as many strategies as you want for each objective area. So at the top, it's grounded in an objective. I'm assuming most would be Raise Up Oregon objectives, like number 2 that we've been focused on for the RSA, but there could be other objectives as well. The next section here in green is literally transferring whatever you've prioritized from your RSA into here for that objective that you were focused on. For other objectives that you haven't done the RSA around, I think it's pulling in whatever information you have, or at least kind of like having that as a placeholder that you can inform and update as you go. But the green is capturing what are the most important root causes to think about related to that objective. Then underneath those root causes are strategies that are, again, directly targeting those root causes. There's a little section over here where you can actually identify which root causes from above this particular strategy is designed to address. So it's like very logically linked, and you can keep track of that. And providing a detailed description of the strategy that, for example, if you're using a Raise Up Oregon strategy, would include whatever that lists in the Raise Up Oregon document and could build on that in order to like sufficiently address the unique root causes that you're seeing in your area. As well as then underneath that strategy, specific work plans that are directly tied to that work. So we've got the status. I think Erin, you had mentioned that's useful. And this is exactly, I think almost exactly the same as the current work plan template, and just includes kind of the basic areas. Okay, so high level, this is what it looks like, the draft. In a second, I'm going to show you a case example of what this could actually look like with like real root causes and real strategies and a work plan. But anything first glance as you look at this, any initial reactions before we look at the case study of what this looks like filled out?
So those resources needed, it seems like we are asking for resources when actually it maybe should say resources allocated. And that includes like human power, blended and braided approaches in some instances, right? So a description of different things. It just seems that, yeah, needed, yeah, okay, thank you.
Yep.
I wanted to say thank you for clarifying that not everything is part of our RSA, because there are several times you said RSA and I kept thinking majority of our strategic plan or stuff that we're working on is not connected to the thing we just did. So I thank you for clarifying that there is more than just the RSA that we work towards.
Yep, absolutely. And I think that's, you're not gonna have the amount of information that you're gonna have with objective 2, since we just did an entire regional system assessment around it, but that can be something just to figure out what are the most important root causes for those additional objective areas to put in there to ground whatever strategies you're designing, ground them in. And we can talk about that as we get there. But Erin, knowing that there's other objectives that haven't gone through an RSA process, do you still find this green section useful? Would that be useful for those other areas?
I mean, to some degree, it's not necessarily going to be rooted in as much data, but I mean, I think we all know our areas and we have relationships with partners that I think we could answer that question for most of the things that we were working on. So
Yeah. Margie, go ahead.
So 2 thoughts. One is, a lot of what our activity is pretty much a matter of requirement in terms of what the funds that we are contracted for direct in terms of delivery. So, that tends to be pretty specific, and there tends to be a history behind the previous decisions about that. The other thing is, if you want to think in the terms of the system altogether, there are many other parts and partners that the Early Learning Division funds for early childhood services. And are those folks being asked to do a parallel set of planning and reporting? Because it's much easier to have other folks be on board with our efforts if we have parallel expectations.
Are you talking about like CCR&Rs and groups like that, Margie?
Relief Nurseries, Healthy Families Oregon, the R&Rs. I mean, there are many different organizations that are recipients of ELD funds.
I'm going to punt that to you, and then I have an idea. But I'm going to punt it to you first if you have any thoughts on that.
Yeah, it's a really valid point, Margie. And I actually do not know which of those organizations have strategic plans, but you're giving me people to ping questions at right now. And I definitely would like to come back to that and think about what that process would look like.
It's just much easier to engage in a productive conversation when it's about all of us figuring it out together rather than everybody telling us what to do. We have plenty of people who tell us what to do.
Well, I mean, that's always going to be kind of a moving target because groups are going to be doing strategic planning at different points in time. I mean, maybe the key here, pulling back on Charlotte's point about making sure that we're incorporating cross-sector efforts, is really harnessing this little column around partners, and some of the activities could be something around aligning and coordinating with blank entity around their upcoming strategic planning, whatever it is, and just sort of embedding that within the plan so that link happens, even if they're not planning at the moment.
Well, I mean, I think everybody has to do the same kind of annual planning for the Early Learning Division. Their timing of when their products are due might be different. I have no idea. But, it's easier when the process is more reciprocal, where, it's like, I can help you guys with yours in this way. Could you help me with ours in this other way?
Yep. Absolutely. Well, and that draws on someone, sorry, I'm not remembering everyone's who said what, but someone said, just figuring out how to bring all these multiple voices and players into this process. So it's all integrated. I mean, I think that's more of the process you use on the ground. I'm curious for this particular conversation, how this template we're looking at could provide a way to integrate and sort of combine all of these different activities or strategy parts. When I was pulling this together, my thought was that they would just be added as separate activities, how they would be linked, or there would be sections within the strategy itself that would link to those other areas. So you could really embed it into this and have some mentions of the other efforts going on. Let me show you the, okay, there's one little second section to the blank template. And then I want to show you the filled in template just to really help flesh out what this might look like. And again, you can add as many strategy rows and activity rows as you need, and there's other objectives you can add. So Erin, it's good. This can be as big as you want. So there was a lot of different ways that outcomes were listed in the prior strategic plans and work plans. Here's one way I'm thinking about. One way this could be hopefully simplified and bring in the short, medium, long-term comments someone made in the beginning. I think Jillian, that was you, like showing that how things will happen over time. That you can actually pull out outcomes for that particular objective and sequence them out. So there's always going to be some sort of like population level child and family outcome for that objective. So for like objective 2, it's how many families are accessing care. You have that all in your ECSA. So that's, you know, there's going to be some sort of population level outcomes that can be listed here. But what I think is more interesting and more actionable for you is thinking about what are all the systems change outcomes that would emerge for that target. And note, one of the easiest ways to come up with systems change outcomes is to take the root causes that you're trying to address and literally reframe them into positive outcome statements. And so as you would look up here and you'd identify, okay, here's the specific root causes from our list that these strategies are addressing. You could take those root causes, flip them into the positive, and then think about reasonably when in time would those outcomes come about as a result of our efforts. And you could put them into either short, mid, or long term. I think we could adjust these numbers, whatever makes sense for you all, but having some sort of time out. We debated whether or not to include the measurement plan in here. I put it in here just for a point of conversation, so that there would be some sense of how you might actually measure those outcomes in those different ecosystem areas. And so we can play around with this and how to make sure that that's supported. But this was the initial thought for how to lay out multiple outcomes across multiple strategies in a way that you can see them as a whole. And it illuminates some opportunities for your measurement plan to actually measure multiple things with the same kind of like approach. So before we go into that fleshed out version of this little like case example underneath, any thoughts on what you're seeing here in terms of how to organize outcomes that would come about as a result of the strategies? Christy, go ahead.
Okay, so I love that you said that we could change the time frame, because this is one that I always look at as challenging when I think of long-term and 5+ years. For a lot of our programs and the work that we're doing, we're starting prenatally or with infants. And so if our impact is thinking about systems change and kindergarten readiness or children entering school and being successful, you're looking at 6+ years there for a pilot cohort of data to even be looked at. So when I think of long-term, you're looking at 7 to 10 years typically. So just that comment on there. And then from the first page, geographic area, I heard Margie mention this, and
Yeah.
a couple of others, that a lot of times our activities are specific to a geographic area of our region. It's not the entire region.
Yep.
And if we put something into our strategic plan and partners read it, it can be, oh, well, you said in your strategic plan, you're doing this. And, it really was the resources were around a specific community or area. So I would like to see within this page somewhere that said, geographic area or areas, and it could be a regional strategy or community specific. And then with partners also, a lot of this work, there's another partner taking the lead and we're a supporting role in it. So if there's like with the CCR&Rs and for some of us and parenting hubs, who's the lead partner and then what is our role in it or who else is involved? We may not necessarily be the ones who are taking the lead, but it's still very much a part of a priority for our region.
Yep, that's great. Did that fit? I'm gonna get to your other comment in a second. Does that work for people? Who's the lead? Who are the partners? Okay, I like what you and Margie said about geography. So let me ask you all this. Would it make more sense to qualify the strategies by geography or population, like Molly mentioned? Or would it make more sense to qualify the activities by the geography or population? Like, do you typically use kind of the same strategies, but they might have different activities or like flavors in different areas? Or do you really use like very separate strategies in geographies?
So we have been charged from the very beginning as hubs to serve those with the greatest need first, and to not take kind of a shotgun approach to how we deliver services, because there just weren't enough resources really to do the best for everyone. And so sometimes that means it's specific subsets, or
Yeah.
sometimes it's specific geographic areas that are concentrations of those subset populations. But like in an area like Marion and Polk, there are very few services that we deliver to the entire region. We just don't have the resources to do that. So we've made sure that we've delivered services. And so sometimes that's at the higher strategy level, but then it's also down in the activity level as well.
Yeah. So I think, and I love Danny's comment, which has come up in many hubs, like there's different root causes that show up in different areas. By the way, when I start moving, it's because I'm thinking, so sorry, that's distracting. I just have to move. So I think in the root causes, several hubs have made it very clear, like this is a county specific or like area specific or even population, Molly, specific root cause. So I think you can certainly indicate that here. And from what you just said, Margie, I think let's just be flexible with accommodating this to your region. So if there's a particular strategy that is just focused on like one county, because it's super different, then I think you just mention that in the strategy, that this is just focused on county A, or it's, region A. Or if there's a strategy that goes over a couple places, but the activities are different, just put in like another header, like activities for county A or whatever it is. I think we can kind of like be flexible with how this is laid out so that it can accommodate to your different regions. But still keep sort of the basic structure template so you can compare across hubs. But this feels like a fairly simple workaround to qualify which strategies and or activities are specific for regions. Does that seem to feel like it will work for you all as well?
So for us, 65% of our population that we focus on lives in the Salem-Keizer attendance area. So we tend to parse it down to either school catchment area or zip codes. So it's even a much smaller subset than a county, because Salem-Keizer represents a larger population than what probably 2/3 of Oregon's counties have each.
Yep.
So, I mean, it's really, and that's where you need to have that ability to reflect the different geographies and population concentrations across the state, because it's extremely wide range.
Right. And Molly, I know you're in the same boat with Multnomah County. So Margie, my sense is there's ways to qualify this to indicate which strategies and or activities are focused on particular areas. My gut is right now, let's keep this as sort of a placeholder way to do that. And if we come up with another idea for how to qualify it, we can add it in, but just taking into account that there needs to be some way for people to qualify which strategies and or activities are focused in different areas. What's interesting to me is many of the root causes are not going to be just the provision of services. It's going to be, you know, like shifting mindsets or shifting decision-making processes that could actually go across multiple areas. And so it's going to be kind of a mix, right? Any thoughts, any other thoughts on this section that I showed you before in terms of outcomes? Oh, Christy, you had mentioned that that great comment about just like simply in terms of human development. It sometimes takes, you know, multiple years before you see change. For me, that came into play very much so in the population level, child and family outcomes, where something you would shift that would affect babies today, you wouldn't necessarily see long-term impacts on kindergarten readiness for another, you know, 6 years, 5 or 6 years. So I think adding short, long, midterm for the child and family outcomes can be helpful, and even identifying what are some of the early outcomes you might see that would tell you that you're on the right path. Do you still see for systems change outcomes, which again, think of things like policy practice changes, decision-making processes, connections and referral pathways, like all that kind of stuff?
Yes.
Do you feel like this is right?
No, I think it still needs to be the longer range, because you still have to look at the data of how that system change impacted those children and families that were trying to access the services, and to see. So I use my example of our Polywog program because we just hit our 6-year anniversary in January. So the children that were in our very first cohort and pilot of that program are in kindergarten this year. Unfortunately, they're not doing kindergarten assessments, so I can't tell you how the data is looking for those families, but that is a strategy that began with enrolling families in prenatal education and trying to connect them to other services. If I want to see the long-term impact of how that, what the outcomes were for children and families, and I'm looking at a data set like kindergarten entry, and did it impact children being ready for kindergarten, which is, you know, one of our primary goals, I need at least that 6 to 7 year time frame for pilots. If we think about the role of hubs and the age trajectory of the children starting prenatal up to kindergarten entry, the long term should match that timeline.
Yep. Carmen and Hillary, what are your thoughts on that? I mean, you can jump in here too. Like, let's make this really a co-design conversation. What are your thoughts, and others too? Because Christy, like, I really appreciate you thinking this through, and I want others' perspectives as well. What do people think about these timelines for outcomes, both for population level and for systems change?
I was thinking about one of the things that you were talking about, the systems change outcomes and the template. Sorry, I'm trying to change my view here if you see me moving around. Was the ecosystem conditions, and some of the biggest ecosystem conditions around like mindset changes, for example, are, I think, could be really linked to some of those child and family outcomes data pieces, right? Like there, for some people, the mindset shift is directly related to whether or not they see the value of a program related to the data.
Right.
But I also think that there are other system, bigger system changes that happen in those shorter term timeframes. So like when I looked at the system change outcomes, the short-term, midterm, long-term made sense to me in terms of how the years are bucketed. Like policies and practices, I'll just give an example of like our Head Start swore up and down they would never be able to change their practice of selecting at the end of June. But in our second year of coordinated enrollment, suddenly they were able to change their practice. So now that they are doing some selection at the same cadence as us, which has an impact on how families then have access to multiple publicly funded programs. And that was a short term. It felt like it took forever to get there, but it was a short term change in the system, a practice that ultimately had the kind of outcome that we wanted for families. So
I mean, totally. It's like so hard to predict. So hard to predict when these things are gonna happen. And so like, I mean, in some ways, like, here's what the literature would say, is you take your best guess at when these things are gonna happen, but systems are like wickedly complex. And you can't like always totally know, but I think this is a good framework to work within, and it also allows you to identify additional outcomes that might need to happen before later ones do, and then go back to your strategy and add stuff in to deal with those outcomes. Like for me, it's this iterative process of identifying the outcomes, reflecting on them, seeing are there additional outcomes that would naturally need to come about, and then going back and revising the strategy and going back again. It's like this cyclical process. Carmen, you look like you were about ready to say something.
I'm just about ready to sneeze.
Oh, that was totally wrong on my part.
Oh,
then.
I can say something as I'm
Go for it.
looking at all these, and I'm looking at all the systems and the strategic plans of whether it's Oregon Health Authority, Department of Human Services, Department of Education. We all have plans. And if I had my dream and I won the lottery, I would love, and I'm hoping maybe from Raise Up Oregon on the state level, to not only come up with a lot of, of wording of where we could work together, but come up with more thoughts as far as the strategic plans, because we all talk different languages. And how do they intersect, and what's similar language? And a lot of times different systems don't see the other as doing similar or the same work or doing it together. And so, if I had my dream, I'd love to see it on a state level, have people translating. And so when we get to the regional level or the local level, we have more to work with. It's just like what you did, Erin, when you were able to help us translate. So it wasn't set in stone, but looking at what exists and being able to pull out versus, it's this or that. You were able to help us with, well, what about a third thought?
Well, and I think in terms of standardizing language, I'm going to like quickly preview something we'll talk about in a few minutes related to supports. But in this toolkit that I'm creating to help support you all in this, I'm planning on creating like a systems change strategy menu of like, here's different types of systems change strategies that are used all over the place to deal with common root causes, and then showing how those root causes could be translated into outcomes, and then potentially even some measurement ideas for how you might measure them, so that at least there'd be some examples people could draw on that could help with at least having the same conversation. Any other thoughts on this before I show you the filled out one? Because I think it really helps like bring it all together. Seeing an example. Charlotte, I see your comment. There's a couple comments. Carmen, I'm gonna like punt this to you in a minute. Begonia's comment about not all strategies needing outcomes in the prior work plans, and aligning timelines. Can you think about how you might respond to those in a minute while I go through this other piece? Okay, so I always find it helpful to like see what the hell this looks like when you fill it out. So I'm gonna show that to you. So I just did this around objective 2, and I took some example root causes that I've seen from several RSAs, and I started playing around with like, if I was a hub, how would I fill this out? And so we've got number 2 up here. And for the root causes, I based this on that visual that we've been looking at, where it kind of has like these central issues around families accessing, the supply of slots, the lack of like workforce in place, and the wages market failure issue. And so I grounded those as like these kind of top condition issue areas, 1, 2, 3, 4, knowing that they interact, and then pulled out the specific root causes that might be prioritized for each of those kind of central areas. And a couple things that I noted as I did that is, guys, the root causes that you all are finding, and you know this, sounds good, Renee, they cut across multiple objectives. Like I saw objective 3, 10, 13, because they're all related. And this was my observation before about, if you look at these objectives in isolation, it doesn't like tell you the full story. And it cripples your ability to strategize in like really powerful ways without seeing them brought together. And so I thought it was very helpful to see like, God, there's a lot of these issues that kind of are playing in the same sandbox, and just listing them out and starting to kind of recognize that. So here would be the root causes that a group would prioritize. You may not prioritize this many. I just did this many just to have like a good working base. So here they are. And then here are 2 examples of strategies that could be developed for these. Again, this is not like saying this is just an example. So I pulled a strategy from Raise Up Oregon specifically, and we know that it's Raise Up Oregon is going to be revised, but there's still going to be strategies in Raise Up Oregon, you know, whatever it is. So let's say there's still a strategy 3.3, something around compensating and recognizing early childhood educators as professionals. Side note, I see the strategies in Raise Up Oregon as so high level that they're not quite actionable. And so there's just a lot that could be fleshed out in my mind to A, make them powerful strategies, and B, target the unique root causes in your areas. So I just put in like bold some of the bits from a systems change lens that I would add in to make this a more powerful strategy. Here's like 3.3 in particular. Like I added something about putting things in place to make whatever you're doing reinforce over time, so you don't have to keep doing it over and over again. Adding something about going across multiple levels and taking equity into account and taking implementation into account. I don't like all of this stuff will be described in the toolkit, some tips, systems change strategy tips for how you might bring those things in. But I think even if you go with a Raise Up Oregon strategy, there could be elements you could add in to make it more powerful and more tailored. So here's the strategy. Here's the root causes from above, 3A and 4A that it's addressing, boom and boom. And then here are the specific activities. Note, I didn't like list them all. I just listed 3. This could go on, that you might take to pursue that strategy. Now note, these activities, in reading all of these work plans that people have done, that groups have done, there was a range of how detailed the activities were. Some activities were like super high level, where it would need like a separate implementation plan to figure out what to do with them. Like if you gave it to someone, they'd be like, I don't know what I'm doing. Other work plans were like super detailed. And so I kind of tried to figure out what's like the happy medium, where there's enough specifics on these activities. So whoever was the lead, this would be the lead thing, Christy, that you mentioned above, whatever we mentioned that above. But there's be enough specifics where people would actually know what they're doing and kind of fleshing the rest out. The status could be ongoing. So here's a strategy example from a direct Raise Up Oregon strategy. Here's a strategy example that doesn't come from Raise Up Oregon, but still addresses the root causes and objectives above. It's just that Raise Up Oregon like has a lot of strategies, but it doesn't have them all. And so you may have other additional strategies that you design to uniquely deal with whatever you're finding in your region. And so here's like a different one around an advocacy campaign to have a municipal like levy to allocate funds to ECE workforce wages. They've done similar strategies in lots of places across the country. I'm sure they've done it in Oregon as well. But you know, like there could be a very kind of fleshed out strategy with how you would have a advocacy campaign to try to get that passed through voters and specifically allocate those dollars to wages. Now, this is the difference, guys. If you would just have an advocacy campaign to try to allocate money to ECE, it would not be targeted in the way this is to that root cause above around wages. And so it really helps, I think, to pull these strategies around a collection of root causes so that they're super targeted and tailored to what you're actually finding is needed. And so this is like specifically around the wage issue, those root causes. And again, you know, listing out activities that would need to be taken to pursue that strategy. I'm gonna just show you this and then I want your reactions to all this. Here's, no, we switched this to be over time. So imagine this would be shifted. This would be a long-term goal. Here's the long-term child family outcome, that more families are accessing high quality care. That's just objective 2 kind of flipped into the population level. And then here's some of the example systems change outcomes. You may differ in when you think they would happen, which is fine. I just put them in for a moment. But here are the root causes that were identified above, flipped into positive outcome statements, which is not a difficult thing to do. You literally just put it into positive framing around what those strategies would bring about. So here's some of the mindset shifts. Here's something about municipal policies passed through that advocacy campaign for the levy. Here's ultimately, say 7+, so Christy doesn't start to sweat, that the workforce would be paid higher wages as a result of that levy that is directing funding towards wages. And long term, like this is in the plus area, that you'd actually have more slots in these specific types of areas or in geographies based on what's happened there. And here's some just like initial ideas for measurement plans that could be fleshed out in greater detail in kind of ongoing evaluation ideas. Okay, so I'm going to pause. Again, this was like a ton. What are thoughts now? Any additional thoughts you're having now that you see this fleshed out in what could be sort of an example? Margie mentioned some of the example activities seem they could be more cost effective at a state level. That's a great point, which was one that I was trying to figure out before, how to link some of these activities to things that might be happening at a state level and or through what we're hoping to kind of do with the hubs in partnership with the ELD to advocate for some higher state level systems changes. I imagine giving Christie's good idea of putting lead and partners, some of this could be led by the ELD or other kind of broader groups. You could modify that.
A long time ago, I worked in the private sector in new product development and marketing. And, you know, we had a strategy for our organization as the manufacturer, but then we also had one for distribution and for, you know, the middleman who oversaw the distribution of the product, and then a retail strategy. And it feels like there needs to be an alignment of purpose and direction between all of those different levels, particularly if we're working on something as important as mindset. But we also have to really understand the ripple effects of some of the initiatives that we might take. And, you know, just as an example of one of those that kind of had some adverse effect was, you know, the expansion predominantly of preschool promise slots without really being able to do anything about the infant toddler population services. All of a sudden we had a whole bunch of providers who said, I'm not going to do infant toddlers anymore. I'm only going to do preschool.
Yep.
And so we ended up with this even greater desert for our infant toddler population. So making sure that whatever we're doing, we're recognizing some of the unintended consequences.
Right, for sure. And even that, like, I've been thinking about that dynamic a lot, because that's not just in Oregon, that's in many other states as well. That's something that a hub region on its own can't deal with by itself, right? Because that has to do with how state level contracts and, you know, lots of other things are developed that reinforce that dynamic, that you're going to have fewer providers having infant toddler slots because they frankly can make more money with preschool slots. And so to address that root cause, which for me is at almost like that state level, this was what I was kind of wrestling with earlier today, is how do we show that there's work being done around that? But like Christy said, the hub is not leading it. The hub is partnering in that effort. effort. And so maybe in that case, like, let's say there was, I'm just gonna make this up. Like, let's say there was this like large statewide, you know, like social marketing campaign or something like that, or advocacy campaign, where the state or the ELD or something would be the lead and the hub would be a partner. I think as we see what develops over time to address some of those state level issues that are coming up in all the hubs RSAs, as we like really figure out what are we going to do about those, I think we could build in ways to link these regional strategic plan work plans to that larger scope of work that would clearly indicate that you are showing your partnership in those larger efforts, but you are not like responsible for those larger efforts. Does that like, okay, I'm seeing Carmen nod her head, which is very good because I
Right.
I
So,
think
so
that's
we
not
could be a
common thought.
partner. We could be a partner in the messaging
right.
and also a feedback loop. So
That's
it's
right.
as we
That's
are
right.
doing that local retail marketing, that we can make sure that we're giving feedback to the people who are leading at the state level to say, here's the yeah buts
That's
and
exactly right.
and
Margie.
what's going to be our strategy to deal with that resistance, because
Yep.
you know, just every change has at least some resistance.
Totally. I mean, all of those in my mind could be activities. You're just like indicating, here's what we're going to spend our time doing, you know, that we think is important as part of that strategy. I totally think that's possible. Charlotte mentioned potential measurements, plans and blah, 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 blah. Yep. So Charlotte was saying around this piece, maybe it's proposed measurement plans. Does that fit, Charlotte?
Yeah, when you put measurement plan in a strategic plan, I feel like you assume that there is going to then be tracking and
Right.
measurement happening. But if we're just kind of brainstorming how we can measure these activities over time, and then when we have capacity and when we get to that part of the regional systems of assessment, then we have this as like a list of things that have already been brainstormed. I think that would be helpful.
Carmen, this might be a good time to respond to that prior comment Begonia made about in prior work plans, not all of the goal areas needed outcomes. What's the ELD Delk's thought about that?
Begonia, can you give me an example of something that you might put in there where you wouldn't have an idea of an outcome?
No, I will have to go to my work plan and pull some of the examples, but I do remember that the advice from the ELD is that not all of them needed outcomes, just a few of them, and that's what we did.
I guess we'd have to think about that. I guess like for me, like in our conversations as a hub team, like that is the place that's like the how will I know? Like how will we know if we're doing it? And those might also need to be edited, like adapted as we go. Those, I'm reading your comment, Margie. Activities and output are relatively easy to measure and report. Outcomes are difficult often when we are impacting just a small subset of the overall population.
But note again, Margie, that some of these outcomes are population level, which is totally true. And that takes like a long time to achieve those. Some of these though are systems outcomes that you do have more like control over measuring. Mindsets is difficult, right? But policy changes, like you can actually you can measure some of those even by just artifacts. And there's other changes that you could see that I think are doable. So I don't know. I mean, I push back a little bit just because I've seen groups who are like, there's no way we can measure this. They do measure it. They figure out a way to like track it and learn from it pretty rapidly over time.
And that might be a place also, Margie, where there needs to be like additional ELD support to say like, we're wanting to like have this, what would be out, like, what are some outcomes that we would be able to measure? And like, where does the ELD have additional access to information that we could be working together to provide? Or at least to point to like, in the future, we would need to have this if we wanted to have something in this box.
Well, as an example of that, Christy mentioned, for many of our programs, we were hoping to continue to use the kindergarten assessment as a way in which to monitor, how is this going? How many are we reaching, and how much of an effect might what we're doing have on that? But that's gone away, and it had also changed several times in its life. But now it's like third grade is going to be kind of our benchmark, unless some of our districts, and actually our districts have more control if they're actually operating some of these preschool promise or other early learning programs, because they generally have some proxy to the kindergarten assessment. Like Salem Kaiser uses DIBELS, and they do it 3 times within the kindergarten year. So Salem Kaiser will be able to look at the kids who were in their Head Start classrooms and their preschool promise classrooms and say, how are those kids doing compared to peers who weren't in those classrooms in the same schools? But for those who are in other settings outside of those school districts, I don't know how they or we will be able to do that. Some of this, the state perhaps has access to the TS Gold information that these providers are often using for observations while these kids are in these pre-K classrooms. Are there ways in which you can use that information to then look at, or school attendance, was attendance at their pre-K program predictive of their attendance in kindergarten? That's a relatively easy one to monitor because it's measured in both settings. But these others will be, I think much more challenging. Well, we don't have a measurement tool.
Mhm. I mean, what this tells me is I think there's a whole second scope of work, frankly, around this measurement bit that may or may not totally be fleshed out here. And I like Jen's comment that like, it's important for us to figure out how to measure our success. But that's like, there's a lot to that, right? And that may actually be, we need to think about the best way to lay that out and to support hubs in doing that. So I think let's take all of these comments around measurement and pull them to the side for a moment and almost set up like a separate process to vet that out. Because I like how it shows up here, that we need to kind of figure out how deeply this goes into the measurement piece. If people just are seeing this though as identifying outcomes, does the template we were looking at, does that seem to satisfy at least the difference between people outcomes and system outcomes and laying those out over time? Does that seem to land well with people and feel like it would fit how the work unfolds in your mind? And Shira, I'm going to read your very long comment.
I still want to know how the ELD will use these plans. I just don't want to.
Hillary, can you?
Yes, I can. So Molly and everyone, I am working on a deliverables connection to show, my brain's real slow today, but at the top, I'll list all of the different deliverables that you have. I'll talk about what they are. And then in the next column, we'll say, what is the ELD going to be doing with those deliverables? So we're really specific, so you know exactly what our plan is around them, and then what the benefit is for the hubs, or our hope for the hubs and how they use those. And I'm working on it. Sorry, I have 50,000 things on my plate like all of you do, but that's coming. And I can just read what I have so far for strategic plan, if that's what, is everybody good with that? You want to hear?
Can I share my slide about
Yeah.
that?
Yes.
Great. We just hadn't gotten to that. Okay, can you see the slide?
Yep.
Great. So this is our timeline, the end of which speaks to the answer to your question, Molly. So we have Rise Up Oregon 2.0 being completed here. Then we have this tricky bit of crunch where, as you said, people said earlier, they would really want to make sure that the updated Rise Up Oregon plan and or objectives were able to be incorporated into their strategic plan. It might not all happen perfectly in this time around. It's okay. That's submitted in November. So even like before all those things are officially submitted, when we already know a lot of things that are going to be in your strategic plans, that we would start working with the DELC strategic planning team. So Alyssa, Serena, David Mandel, in order to integrate, and Sue Miller, in order to integrate what's in your hub strategic plans with what's in the DELC plan, which I think also goes back to some comments that Margie made about the places where there's more leverage and more efficiency in what can happen at the state level than at the regional level. So our director, Alyssa Chatterjee, has asked me to put together a plan for her of what that timeline would look like and what those, like how those conversations and meetings should go in order for us to do that work together. So that's something that I have in very draft form and would like to talk to you about all that again on another date. Does that answer your question, Molly?
Yeah, it does help. I think I think where my head is a little bit stuck is I know, you know, I've been doing this a million years. I know how to make a strategic plan that's useful for my local group. And I know how to write it in a way that my backbone approves of it and that my governance council understands and accepts it. I don't know how to write it in such a way that it becomes useful to you as you do that work with DELC. That's where I don't know, you know, we'll need guidance from you. Like, do you only want goals or outcomes that can be measured by the data we have? Like that part, I can't, that's the part I can't anticipate. Do you want us to dream big and put in the big, you know, 10-year plans we have for our community? Would that be useful? But I guess I just feel like I want to put on the table that this group of people here around this call know how to do strategic planning. They've been doing it for a very long time. This is a great template, Erin. We've all used a million different templates and toolkits. This one looks like it would work for us. We'll have to modify it based on our governance council structure, our backbone structure. But the piece that's always been missing is how does this help the ELD? We don't need you to help us do our local work. We need to figure out how we can fit in with, does that make sense, the state plan, so that it's useful? Yep. That's what I was trying to get. Okay.
And I totally understand that. And this will also be the first time that the state is writing a strategic plan that fits what is called for by this new governor's office. So there's some back and forth there. But, and Molly, like an answer to your concern of like, I don't know how to write it in the way that's helpful to you. I think that we're going to have to do some very specific asking of that internal DELC leadership of like, what precisely do you need? And also it's going to have to be a dialogue, right? Like we're not going to be able to say like, great, I'll just read these and then I'll know exactly what the hub wanted. Like, no, we're going to have a back and forth. That's like, tell me more about this. And like, is it the same as over here where this hub said something similar, or these two different things? Like it'll need to be a dialogue, which is why Alyssa was like, can you please like come up with what these dialogues need to look like and how much time it's going to take and what that convening structure might be. So we did talk in our meeting that Hillary and Aaron and I had with the Hub Association exec team on Friday, we did talk about having some in-person convenings. And so that might be a place that we should have a big session where we can have Hub leaders and our strategic plan dev leaders in the same space where they can really ask those dialogue questions that they need. I see some people nodding. Okay.
I mean, in a lot of ways, like, I'll just throw a 2 cents out. So I think it's incredibly valuable looking across all 16 hubs RSA results and seeing the pattern of root causes coming up in both local level and state level and et cetera. So you can really get the landscape of like, here's what everyone's dealing with. I think you could do a same approach, theming the strategies coming out of all 16 hubs, Molly, and kind of seeing like, here's how the state and all these different areas are addressing some of these root causes. What are we learning from that? And what does that tell us for how the state not only can support it, but could leverage it and build on it and expand on it and kind of like do that partnership where there's issues that are too big for any one hub to address, but across hubs in partnership with the ELD could actually make some traction. I think it's just having a like good view of the landscape. What does this look like? And figuring out ways to capture that and update that. I think that's exciting to me because then it has more of a strategic approach across the state and it elevates and uses what you're doing at the local level in a different way. I see you're nodding, Molly. Okay. Yeah. Brenda, totally. I think keeping this dynamic conversation going is this is great. Like, thank you for being so honest. This was really, really good feedback and like like we're making changes real time. So this is excellent. I want to get a sense just for my own, because I'm like developing all this stuff. Does this feel like, given the shifts and some of the tensions we were talking about today, do people feel good enough with where we landed for me to take this template and start really developing a toolkit around it? Or do you feel like there needs to be at least one more session of like heavy co-design versus just kind of minor tweaks given where we landed today? I don't know if we should do like this or like thumbs up or how to.
So my request would be to not build a process that's so cumbersome that we're spending all of our time maintaining the plan document and not having time to implement the plan. You know, we have little tiny organizations with really big responsibilities, and it takes a lot of intentional work in the field, on the ground, to make that happen. Just putting it on paper, it's like blowing up birthday candles. It doesn't make it so. My 2 cents worth.
Well, I guess I'll pull that back to the group. Do you feel like this template, going in its most simplified way, could be something that would be created and then continually updated, added to? Someone mentioned something about monitoring, and in the very beginning, I think Molly, you said, how could we integrate quarterly reports to this? Seeing this template as a way to capture the work that has been done, as well as future work, and it almost becomes a living document where you could like hide things that have already been done, hide activities that have already been done, but use it really as a work plan where you help the work move forward versus just something you fill out and like it's a waste of time. Do you feel like this template is in such a way that it could be used in an ongoing, very like actionable value added thing? Or is it still just like, Aaron, this is just a damn deliverable? What's your sense? And that's for everyone on the call. And you could be totally honest, guys, like I'm wearing my big girl pants. And the idea is to make this value added so that it's not a waste of your time. I just want to kind of get a sense of like, how close are we?
To me,
My-
Eric, oh, go.
My instinct is that it's fine. It's fine as deliverables go, but I'm going to caveat that by saying that like I have toolkit, template, Excel spreadsheet fatigue to the max. And I can't, like, all I can think about is not one more. So like everything, I look at it and I look at it logically and I go, yeah, I could do that. I can make that work. That could work for me. And then I deep down inside emotionally, I'm like, I'm gonna wait till last minute to probably enter the data into whatever it is, because I'm so fatigued by process right now. So that's where I am at.
I am with Dorothy, and I will say that the template is okay. It's actually great to see everything in one page, but what I'm conflicted is with the timeline with the rest of the deliverables, right? So you have to do the regional assessment and then convening families around preferences and needs, and then the Raise Up Oregon, and then the SP, and then the work plan, and then something that will come in between. And I'm concerned about what Margie and Dorothy are saying about, are we gonna spend the whole life doing this convening and this planning, and then it gives us really limited time to do the work, right? So can we align things?
And I want to just say that it's not just for me personally, it's not just about the ELD and the RS EXA and RSA and all. It's like, that is part of what we're supposed to be doing, but like that's layered on top of, for me, my backbone organization also just went through a strategic plan update, and I was just doing action planning within my department of my backbone organization. And if we're participating in any sort of that for like other partner agencies, there's a little bit of a like, I looked at that trajectory diagram and I was like, I have no breathing room. I don't have a moment where I go, whew, okay, all right, let me take I'm going to take a mental break, and then I'm going to come back fresh and be able to like, all right. So sometimes even beyond just the ELD, and I say this to my backbone organization as well, like, I feel like I'm constantly in a state of planning or reassessing the planning without getting to the work. And that begins to get to a place of like, I mean, it's why I feel like I'm behind in my RSA, because I feel like I've had to choose sometimes between, do I deal with this email that's about coordinated enrollment for these families getting into the service, or do I take the time to do this other thing that I need to plan for a piece of the RSA, which is also important. And that's where I feel like I've been often this last year, is trying to figure out which part can I do today. And I get a little bit worried. So that wasn't the answer to your question, Erin. I just wanted to be super honest about like, I'm super fatigued.
Yeah. Yeah.
Dorothy, I want to add on to that because it's not just us feeling super fatigued. What I'm also seeing is that my partner organizations that are usually heavily invested in this work are stretched so thin right now as well, that trying to do some of this at the rapid pace that it seems to be happening is getting challenging. That when we're scheduling a meeting time to talk about something, especially as we've gone through the EXA and the RSA process, just regional stewardship committee and the partners that we wanted to bring into that work, I have them emailing me and telling me, I can't physically leave my building to do this mapping exercise together with everyone. So I'm not going to be there today, to the point we've had to cancel 2 months in a row.
Okay, thank you all for sharing that. It's helpful to have that knowledge, and I think that's where we've been sensing how things are and how people have shared that. So I think that we need to Erin asked, like, do you feel like you could say this is good, or do we want to have more conversation about it? I think that we need to have more conversation about it. I think that we need to look at what the bounds of this piece of work should be in terms of what can happen in the time that we have. And then come back to also a conversation about what would be helpful in completing what we define as what will happen. I will, yeah.
Could I interject something? I'm just wondering if it's possible. I actually really like this template, but also like some of us are already working on things and we have a reason internally for the timelines that we have. And I hate to create something and then recreate, right? Is it possible that this could be like this is a really great tool that we can use if we want to, but as long as we include these pieces, we can structure it however we want to or need to, so that it fits our community? Or is this going to be shared like on the ELD website and you want them all to look the same?
I always lean toward that flexibility, but I
Yeah.
don't want to make any commitment to that right now. I think we need to think about that.
Okay, just throw that out there for some discussion,
Yeah,
internal discussion among yourselves.
yeah. Okay, I will look for some time that we can dive more into this. And we will send out the recording and the notes, or some notes that were captured in the slides.
And I'll send out the template for you
And
all.
the
And
template.
you can like add comments or whatever and just send them directly to me. And we can just keep kind of percolating on this. And then maybe the next time we meet, if people send me ideas, I can incorporate them in and come back and do kind of another review, as well as go into some of the issues Carmen was saying. Like the chat has been really helpful. You guys have been identifying really important issues. And it's kind of like the package around the template that we're talking about. So bravo for being open. Thanks for playing in this co-design process. I know this is kind of different, right? But this has been really helpful.
All right, thank you, everyone. Have a good rest of your day.